Derek Chauvin's defense rests as another police shooting roils Chicago. Pfizer CEO says we're probably going to need a third vaccine shot. And Love Hate 8 featuring America's most underrated pop star. Friday Need to Know. Let's go. Good morning. This is Cheddar's Need to Know podcast for Friday, April 16th. I am Jill Wagner with Carlo Versano. Hey, Carlo. Good morning.
Good morning, my friend. How are you?
I'm okay. Tired.
Yeah. Busy week.
Okay, so we are waking up to news of another mass shooting. At least 8 people have been killed in a shooting at a FedEx warehouse in Indianapolis overnight, police said. The gunman killed himself. Several others were injured. Authorities say it's too early to know whether the shooter was actually an employee at that facility. Local media reports citing witnesses who say that a man with some kind of automatic rifle opened fire on the floor of the warehouse.
The third mass shooting this year in Indianapolis alone, this looks like. The fifth mass shooting in the United States in as many weeks. Also, there was an attempted mass shooting at the San Antonio airport last night that was stopped by an officer who shot and killed the suspect as he was approaching the terminal with a weapon and a box of ammunition. So could have been, we could be talking about 2 mass shootings this morning. We're only talking about one, as depressing as that sounds, but something to keep an eye on today. We'll find out more. I think the police are doing a press conference in a couple hours here.
Meanwhile, Derek Chauvin's defense rested its case after Chauvin invoked his Fifth Amendment right not to testify. The trial will be taking the day off and then will begin closing arguments on Monday, after which the jury will be sequestered to begin deliberations. A verdict could come as soon as next week.
And meanwhile, Jill, the news out of Chicago, this is sort of somewhat related, I guess. The city of Chicago releasing body cam footage of the fatal police shooting of 13-year-old Adam Toledo. He was killed last month. I don't know if you've seen this video. It's pretty hard to watch. It's grainy and jumpy, but it appears to show this boy, Toledo, carrying a gun as he's being chased down an alley by police, then dropping that gun and raising his hands to comply with an officer who had told him to stop just before the officer then files a single shot. This all happens in the span of literally less than a second. It's just a really tragic story every which way. The mayor of Chicago, Lori Lightfoot, calling for calm. There were some protests overnight, but it didn't look like it got too bad. This is the national tableau on which we're going to get the Chauvin verdict, maybe next week, maybe not, but it could get very hairy. The tensions are high. Emotions are raw right now.
I mean, a 13-year-old kid. I for one can't watch any of these videos, to tell you the truth. Yeah. It's too gut-wrenching and it will give me nightmares. But this is a rough one.
I mean, Jill, I watched this video last night. It's just, I hesitate to even say this, but it's going to sound very old man yells at clouds kind of thing. But this was a Sunday night. This kid was 13 years old running around an alley with a gun. I'm sorry, but where were the parents? I know that makes me sound like an old man. But seriously, I mean, I'm not. It doesn't sound like that. I mean, obviously, this boy should still be alive today. But at some point, there's some responsibility that needs to be taken by parents here. 13 years old running around with a gun on a school night. I'm sorry, that's not okay.
Yeah, I mean, and just back to the Chauvin trial, Carlo, as you point out, all of this is happening in the backdrop of the Chauvin trial, which we likely will get a verdict next week. It sounds like the judge purposely did not want this jury deliberating over the weekend, which is why he said he wanted closing arguments to start Monday instead of today. The trial has moved relatively quickly, I would say.
Yeah, I mean, the defense they did 2 days of testimony, and it was mostly just smearing George Floyd. So again, this is one of those cases where it seems like it's sort of open and shut, but we've been down that road many times. And I think, as I've said before, I think if he is not acquitted, but if he gets anything that doesn't have the word murder in it, I think we're going to see a lot of unrest in this country.
All right, let's switch gears and talk about the pandemic right now. The CDC has identified the number of breakthrough cases. That's the people who got infected with COVID even after they were vaccinated. And it's a very small cohort. Approximately 5,800 cases have been confirmed among a pool of 66 million Americans who've received a full course of vaccination. So we're talking 0.008% of the fully vaccinated population. About 7% of those cases require hospitalizations, and that is well within the expectation for vaccines that have efficacy rates between 90 and 97%.
Yeah, this was I think very encouraging to see, because we've heard from people who are like, you're talking about how vaccines are effective. It's like, well, I heard from a source, or I have a family member who said they know somebody who got COVID after they got vaccinated. Like, that is going to happen, right? It just is. So now we're sort of seeing how infrequently that's happening. Not to say that it's not something to worry about.
And
but
I
it's
did
just
hear an
not,
interview
yeah.
just on that point. I did hear an interview with a woman who had a pretty actually severe case of COVID after she was vaccinated. And her take on it, instead of saying, "Oh, I should have never gotten vaccinated," she took the other approach. And she's like, while I was sick, all I thought about was how much worse I would have been had I not been vaccinated.
I think that's a very smart mindset. I like that. Meanwhile, Jill, Pfizer CEO, well, he says we are probably going to need a booster shot of that vaccine within 12 months. Again, not too surprising. I think this is sort of to be expected. He says it's looking increasingly likely that we'll probably need annual coronavirus shots, just because we're not going to kill this virus. We're just not. And they may be able to package those with the flu shot into sort of like an annual thing that you do. So again, not too surprising. We don't really know yet, because they're still collecting data on these vaccines and how long the antibodies last, but certainly something to note this morning.
He actually said 6 to 12 months, which I thought was a little bit odd, because data after 6 months shows that these antibodies are still quite high. I think for Pfizer, it was like 91%, down from 95%. But I think
6
part
months
of it
seems
may have
really
to do what?
Yeah. No, I think 6 months seems that seems a little soon.
6 months. It sounds like part of this, though, may have to do with the variants. As you say, we haven't controlled this virus, and there's going to be additional variants. And so perhaps that's like the flu, where they tinker with it each year. One question, though, that we still don't have an answer to is whether, if you just had the Pfizer vaccine, or if you had the Johnson & Johnson vaccine originally, could you get a Moderna booster? Or vice versa? Do you have to stick with the same one? We know Moderna is also working on a booster shot. We pretty much, as you said, knew that we would likely all need to get booster shots, but I think this is only going to add to the vaccine hesitancy that's out there. And it does look, at least anecdotally, like pausing that J&J vaccine is making things worse on that front. Doctors across the country are saying that people who were supposed to get the Johnson & Johnson vaccine and were told they may need to reschedule are just saying no thank you in general to vaccines. They're not saying, okay, great, I'll take the Pfizer one. There are also reports of people showing up at the hospital who have zero symptoms. They're just worried because they'd received the Johnson & Johnson vaccine. So whatever you think of the FDA and the CDC, and being totally diligent and upfront about what's going on with Johnson & Johnson, these are the unintended consequences here. Related or not, there is more evidence we're getting close to hitting this so-called vaccine wall. Mark Levine, he's a council member in New York City on the health committee. He tweeted yesterday, New York City has hit a tipping point in vaccination. After months of intense competition for appointments, slots are now filling much more slowly. Our challenge is no longer managing the crush of demand. It's bringing this vaccine to people who need it and building trust in this life-saving solution. And you're hearing about that across this country. New York is probably least impacted. This has been the case across the country for a couple weeks now.
I think there's no question we're starting to hit that wall. I'm actually doing a report on this later on Cheddar, and in my research, I found there's a county in North Carolina, Carteret, I believe that's how you pronounce it, Carteret County in eastern North Carolina. They're packing up all their vaccine sites at the end of this month. I think there's just no more people who want shots in that county who haven't already gotten them. I found that excruciatingly depressing. Also, back to a point that you just made, Jill, about vaccine hesitancy. There was a new YouGov poll out yesterday about this, specifically about the Johnson & Johnson vaccine. It's pretty interesting stuff. So it's not good for Johnson & Johnson. So look at this. The perception of the Johnson & Johnson vaccine before that CDC announcement of the pause, 52% of people said it was safe, 26% of people said it was unsafe. Perception of that same vaccine after the announcement of the pause, it flips. 37% of people say it's safe. 39% of people say it's unsafe. So that's a 15%, delta in just because of that announcement. Now, that's not all bad news. The good news, this is a very important silver lining. People are picking up that there's differences between the vaccines. That was very specific to Johnson & Johnson. When pollsters are asking people whether that pause affected their perception of vaccines writ large, it hasn't. So that's good. People are still very confident in the Moderna and the Pfizer shots. And remember, we have 300 million of those vaccines coming to us. That's more than enough to vaccinate the entire adult U.S. population. So again, Johnson & Johnson is relatively small potatoes in terms of our overall vaccine strategy, but it's important worldwide, as is AstraZeneca. And that's really the issue, I think, that we're going to see with the hesitancy.
All right, we got some really good economic data yesterday. The U.S. economy just continuing to rebound. Retail sales for the month of March jumped nearly 10%. This is key. Consumer spending, the biggest driver of GDP, I think it's like 70%. At the same time, weekly unemployment claims dropped to their lowest level since last March. First-time claims in the 500,000 range, which is the first time there's been a 5 in front of that number in quite a while.
They were looking for 700. The economists were looking for 700 and change, I think. So it was a nice drop to see. Stock market ripping higher on that news yesterday. The Dow closed above 34,000 for the first time. But yeah, look, I mean, stimulus checks starting to stimulate, right? That's what you're seeing here. And by the way, you want to talk about crazy numbers? You see the China GDP numbers? China's economic growth, 18.3% in Q1. I don't think I've ever seen that before in my life anywhere.
The exports in China rose something like 30%, and that was actually less than expected. And China and stocks in China went down. This was earlier this week. It's crazy.
They're ripping over there.
All right, something near and dear to my heart, and a show that Congress can actually get things done if they want to. Food makers are going to soon be required by law to list sesame as an allergen on packaged foods. The House followed the Senate in passing the FASTER Act. It's a bill that's been a priority for the food allergy community for years. Sesame now becomes the 9th allergen for which the FDA will require plain language labeling wherever it's used. Nearly 1.6 million Americans have a sesame allergy. And as a mom of a daughter who has a sesame allergy, I could tell you this is the trickiest one because these food companies are not required to list it. And it can often go disguised as natural flavoring or spices. And I never even realized that this was a thing until I found myself having to pore over food labels to try and figure them out to see if they were safe for my daughter. And I'd say most just have a generic spices or natural flavoring somewhere in there. So you can't, if you have a sesame allergy or an allergy that's not one of these top 8, until this FASTER Act, you just can't, you either have to contact the food maker or you just can't serve it. And it's just so limiting, it's quite a challenge. So this is huge. This is a really important first step. There was only, I think, 11 lawmakers who voted nay. And you better believe I went through the list to figure out who they were and make sure none were in my area, or else they would have heard from me. None of them were. So good news there.
Good for you.
But it doesn't take effect, by the way, until 2023.
I was just going to say, I think Biden's expected to sign it into law, right? I don't think it's controversial. I think it will get passed, right?
I mean, if he doesn't sign this into law,
Well, Jill Wagner is walking down to 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue, and she has got something to say. Uncle Joe.
Yeah, I think I don't believe that there's any questions about it, but it's not done till it's done. So I'm not taking a victory lap just yet, although I was crying tears of joy. This is not an exaggeration, Carlo. Somebody from FAIR, which is Food Allergy Research and Education, it's a great group that's been advocating for this. They were streaming the vote live on Instagram, and the comments from other parents and people with food allergies just about how much of a life-changing thing this is going to be. And other people said it too. They're like, I'm literally crying tears of joy. And I was overcome with emotion
That's
just
great.
because it's so difficult. And it's not going to fix the problem, but it helps.
That's fantastic. That makes me feel better about our sclerotic Congress, I guess.
Jeff Bezos wrote in his final shareholder letter as Amazon CEO that the company needs to do a better job for our employees. He disputed the public narrative about Amazon employees being treated as robots, but he acknowledged that the recent unionization attempt in Alabama showed that the company had work to do in creating a vision of success for its 1 million workers.
This was a pretty interesting shareholder letter, as these things, about as interesting as these things ever are. Especially because it's, as you said, his last one before he becomes, well, he's not really retiring, but he's just becoming executive chairman. But he says that to reduce repetitive stress injuries for warehouse workers, Amazon is, quote, developing new automated staffing schedules that use sophisticated algorithms to rotate employees among jobs that use different muscle tendon groups. There's something about how Amazon talks about its workers that always feels like a little bit dystopian to me, though I guess that what he's basically saying is, you get these injuries at warehouses from like lifting things a bunch in a row, right? So they're going to try and rotate people so they're exercising different parts of their muscles. He is, as I said, stepping down as CEO later this year, but it seems like he's really starting to think about his legacy. That was sort of my takeaway from this. He also noted, by the way, Amazon now has 200 million Prime members. That jumped 50 million last year. You want to talk about how COVID was good for some companies? Look no further than Amazon.
So I read the shareholder letter, and a couple of things stuck out at me. That did all those new numbers that we got just about how big Amazon is. Jeff Bezos also saying that they've created $1.6 trillion of wealth for share owners. So he says, yes, of course, he's the biggest, and he's become quite wealthy. But he shared a letter that a couple, Mary and Larry, had written him. He says out of the blue as he was sitting down to write his last shareholder letter, and they've been able to they invested in Amazon. I think like one of the first few days that it was a publicly traded company in 1997. And they're now, with that wealth, it's changed their lives. So, he's just pointed to that. He was also talking about the value that this company has created for customers. And he was saying not only they offer low prices, vast selection, fast delivery, but imagine we ignore all of that for the purpose of this estimate and value only one thing, that we save customers time. Customers complete 28% of purchases on Amazon in 3 minutes or less. Half of all purchases are finished in less than 15 minutes. Compare that to the typical shopping trip to a physical store: driving, parking, searching store aisles, waiting in the checkout line, finding your car, and driving home. Research suggests the typical physical store trip takes about an hour. So if you assume that a typical Amazon purchase takes 15 minutes and that it saves you a couple of trips to a physical store a week, that is more than 75 hours a year saved. That's important. We're all busy in the 21st century, so that we can get a dollar figure. Let's value the time savings at $10 per hour, which is conservative. 75 hours multiplied by 10 an hour, subtract the cost of Prime, gives you the value creation for each Prime member of about $630. Now, I don't necessarily need the dollar amount in there, but I do think that there's something about this idea of saving people time. And you'll see, especially when you become a parent, that's valuable. I never bought anything on Amazon until I became a parent. And I'm just like, I
Right.
need to do this on my phone while my daughter is sleeping right now. I can't leave
Yeah.
her alone. I can't go to the store, and I don't have the
That's a
time
good
to do it.
point.
So obviously
That
he's painting as rosy a picture about Amazon, but it would, I think we do have to recognize that this company has changed the game when it comes to
oh
shopping
no,
and how
clearly, yeah.
and the ease at which it can be done.
It's funny because friend of the pod, Scott Galloway, that's one of his big things that he writes about in his newsletter is like this idea of saving time and how that's like the most valuable thing you can create, right? The ability to give people back some time in their lives.
Okay, we don't usually cover celebrity breakups on this podcast, but this is a big one. J-Lo and A-Rod, no more. The pop star and the former baseball player confirming that they're going their separate ways in a statement to the Today Show, and they say they are going to remain friends.
It's always my favorite part of celebrity breakups when they put out the press release saying we're going to stay friends. Nobody stays friends with their ex, do they? Is that a thing that happens? Maybe like eventually down the road, but no one's like breaking up with somebody and then like the next day like they're going out for like a friendly coffee. I don't know. I just hope J Lo and Ben Affleck get back together because they were always I feel like they were really the celebrity couple that I think had staying power. Bennifer.
I don't know if I agree with you on that, but I will say the friends thing seems a little idealistic at this
Yeah.
point. All right, let's do a little love hate eight.
One thing we love. Bruno Mars. You hear that? I'm playing the Bruno Mars song. Yes, Bruno Mars, America's most underrated pop star. He sings, he dances, he just pumps out hits. He elevates any song that he's featured on. I went in a deep Bruno Mars YouTube hole the other day. You know how that happens, right? They suggest a Bruno Mars video on the right side, and then next thing you know, you've been watching 8 hours of Bruno Mars clips. But I was just like humming on that Uptown Funk song all week. Becky said that's a really big time dad move where you just start becoming obsessed with a pop song that was like super popular 6 or 7 years ago. But I really like him, and I think that he's underrated. And I say that as I look at the number of views on this Uptown Funk on the video on YouTube. It was 4 billion views. So maybe he's not underrated except to me, but I like him. I'm not afraid to say it.
I agree with your take on Bruno Mars. I was just gonna say I don't think he's underrated. I think I think he's
You think he's
appreciated. But
adequately? Yeah.
yeah, I think we all know he's super talented, but I totally appreciate your enthusiasm. One thing that we hate, it's something that we've been talking about a little bit on this podcast, just trying to navigate this new pandemic world. Is it okay to ask someone if they've been vaccinated? Are we really making Saturday night plans? And how many masks do I actually need to wear?
It's tough, right? I think the vaccination thing that is like the first thing you talk about now. I think with somebody, if like you run into somebody on the street, maybe that's just over here, but it's like the top of mind, I think, for everybody. And I think it's totally fine to ask people. I don't think there's anything wrong, sure, anything to be shameful about in asking people about that. Okay, and finally, one thing that we drank in this case, 3 words, Jill. Iced coffee season. It's back. It's big. I love it. Starbucks has this new shaken espresso, iced espresso drink. I forget what it's called, but it's sweeter than I usually like, but it's really like it's like a little dessert, and I've been getting those when I go out on my walks. Probably 500
I'm a hot
calories.
coffee gal all year.
I know, it's weird. I know.
All right, we're going to leave it there. That's what you need to know for Friday, April 16th.
Have a good weekend, guys.